Hello, everybody. Good morning. I'm going to be talking to Jasmine Zelaya this morning. And I'm going to just briefly pan you around before I invite Jasmine in so that you can see an overview of her solo exhibition, Late Bloomers. We've got paintings and ceramics here that we're going to be talking about both. So let's bring. Morning, everybody. Hey, Jasmine.
Hi, Kevin.
How are you?
I'm good.
Good
Good
morning.
morning.
Yeah. Thanks for taking the time this morning to talk to us.
No, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's a beautiful show. So I'm going to just pan around, and
Hmm.
I think we'll start with the title of the exhibition, Late Bloomers. Maybe actually, we'll back up. Would you mind just introducing yourself and where you're from and anything else you'd like to say?
Mhm. My name is Jasmine Zelaya. I'm a multidisciplinary artist based in Houston. This is my first time showing in Austin with like a solo show. Um, and I'm just getting over COVID, so I may cough a
Oh,
bit. Sorry.
yeah,
Apologies in
how are you
advance.
feeling?
Better, just kind of like, you know, fatigued and
Mhm.
still kind of gross, but much better than I was doing.
Well, being a trooper for talking to us today, despite. Um, so yeah, let's. How about the title of the exhibition, and maybe how does this show really differ from past shows?
Um, this is sort of unique because they're all portraits, and they all are, I think of them as self-portraits. So usually the figures in my work are sort of invented, or they have little bits of myself or people I know or people that I'm thinking of or like features that I want. Um, but I think this one is unique because I was really thinking of myself and my youth, which is where the title is based from. Late bloomers is sort of this idea that of this like imposed deadlines or timelines that we're supposed to sort of flow with in our
Mm.
lives. You know, like you're supposed to start dating at this point. You're supposed to like I don't know, like for me, makeup or things like that, you know, like that I wasn't really interested in my youth or was still trying to figure out. The one on the right, the orange one with the stripes, was kind of the start of it. That one's called Weird Years because I think of my youth as sort of this like weird period of time where I really was still learning so much about myself and trying to figure it out and um, you know, like peer interactions. And I was always sort of like a black sheep in my family. I think just interested in things that my family didn't understand, but yet my friends and peers also thought some of the things that I was interested in were weird, you know? So it
Mm.
was sort of this like reoccurring things and themes in my work are this tension, two things sort of battling. So for me, a huge part of it is um, being in an immigrant household and living in, I was raised kind of like in a white neighborhood. I mean, we lived in a poor area, and then my mother moved us to like a white area, and we were at the time like one of the few brown people in the community. And I think that was something that I was always aware of. And um, it made me feel the sense of otherness. Also, because my mother came to America kind of like in her teens. So I think her sense of searching for her identity and trying to make sense and assimilate, you know, then trickled down to me and my sister. And even my nieces now, my sister has children. So it's sort of these sort of reflections on youth and society and trying to figure out who you are and make sense of that identity. When one side is sort of pushing for assimilation,
Hmm.
less of otherness, and the other side, youth, you're still figuring things out. So even my peers, it was scary to be different, I think, or to have different interests than the norm.
Yeah. So you mentioned this is where this painting that we're looking at now is kind of where the exhibition started in your mind. And you
Hmm.
posted a really nice photo of yourself with this painting wearing the same green and white shirt, right?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was from ninth grade. And as soon as I was painting this, I was like, oh my God, this is like my school picture. And, I was texting my mom, like, Mom, can you please find this? And she did. It took a couple of tries, but it was almost very similar, and I'd forgotten I was wearing these glasses that were super weird at the time. I've always been really blind, so I always have glasses, like,
Hmm.
I don't know, I think of them as like interesting pieces to sort of put on my face for a while, but
So
that
you,
also changes my identity for the period that I'm wearing them. So, uh,
oh,
yeah, it was funny that those two visual um, things connected.
yeah. So you paint, do you look at images when you're painting, or are you painting from imagination? And if I understand, it's kind of a two-part. You started painting this and then thought of your school picture?
As I was painting it. So maybe that's like subconscious.
Yeah.
Um, I don't typically look at images when I'm painting.
Okay.
Sometimes, like if I need a reference, for example, the magenta background one, um,
Okay.
there's, I was thinking of this material. I think it's called Tulle, like Toile.
Mm.
Um, it's a material that, or like a design, um, a textile pattern that was very popular, like turn of the century and like I believe 1800s, like French, but a lot of times it had like working themes and themes of daily life. And I have sort of done similar things. I think I drew like orchids on a painting once, like a mural where it's very flat. I'm very interested in like flat rendering, and sort of it reading like wallpaper. And so it creates a different language between like the patterns and like the flat figures. So it's
Yeah.
for me, I find that I really like excess. Um, and so it is challenging for me to sort of simplify things down to its essence. And this was sort of an example of trying to combine those two things in different languages and create complexity in the image. But these are peonies. I love flowers. And peonies are very beautiful, the pinks. They're very like sexual, they're lush. I just feel like the language itself of this like organic item, object, and then representations of living things is another theme that is very prominent in the show itself and in recent work.
Yeah. There's two other parts of this show that I think people notice first, or have questions about first, I should say, talk to me about first, is of course the teary eyes, and then the way that you've handled the rest of the face. You've got these sort of flower-like patterns and no nose and no mouth.
Mhm.
So I guess maybe we can start with the eyes. I love your explanation of the eyes.
Yes. So the eyes started out as like barely pink in a lot of my early work, and it has since progressively gotten much more pink and red and like watery, juicy eyes. And they've become much more stylized, I think, to like be in harmony with other parts of the paintings. But there's a sculpture that I love by Bernini. It's called The Ecstasy of Saint Teresa, and there's actually a written account um, of Saint Teresa's account with this angel, and she talks about how she came across the angel and he pierced her with her sword, and it was a pain so exquisite. And I don't know, when things really affect you and stay with you, for me, it was that little bit of writing. Um, and I just think it's so beautiful. And then this um, sculpture created by Bernini, it's very small, but it's very impactful. It was actually banned by the church because it was erotic. And I love that. So Teresa is sort of like splayed back, and it looks like she's teetering on like ecstasy and sorrow, like rapture. And that's something that I think is the ultimate goal for me. This, again, tension between these two extreme feelings of like rapture and sorrow. Like sometimes you're so happy you cry, or vice versa, I think this like overwhelming sense of feel like emotions that are coming up. That is my goal behind the eyes. Um,
I think
and they're
that's
my favorite part to paint. I love painting the eyes.
Yeah, I think that especially with sort of the overarching theme of the show, this being about teenage years, um, we've all been there. Like not, confusing emotions, overwhelming emotions, when you're growing up and sort of the confusion between both
Hmm.
positive and negative, strong emotions.
Hmm.
Uh,
Um, you asked about the flower patterns on the face as well.
right.
Um, I think of them as masks, and it's sort of the focus is more about the eyes and the tensions underneath, what's happening underneath. And so I'm thinking about like the search for identity um, within oneself and others. Another thing to note that is also very important is the women in my family are all named after flowers. And so I think of them as like matriarchal, biological, um, again, sexual and different part, like the flowers on the chest. I was thinking of oleanders, um, which are among my favorite flowers as well. I love peonies. I love oleanders because in Texas it's so hot. Things are it's you have to be very hardy to live in the climate here, and it's like surface of the sun hot. And oleanders just bloom and flourish in these really difficult climate, and I love that. And they're so vibrant, but they're also very toxic. It is something that could poison you. Let's say if you make a tea or something. So I love that, like little nuances about these organic elements. But
Mm.
the masks are flowers, and each time I paint them, like it probably doesn't look like it, but it takes a really long time, especially with the background. Those take forever. And so when I'm painting them, it's like this repetitive motion, like with the smaller ones, it's like one brush stroke to lay it down and to create this like radial pattern of the floral petals. And I think of that as this like very meditative process, and I feel like with each petal, like everything I'm thinking of and feeling like goes into the work, is transferred to the work, which is something intimate and special to me. I feel like when we create, we're really putting so much of ourselves into the work. And so that's what it is for me with the
Yeah, and I,
patterns.
I've heard you say too that you just mentioned putting a lot of yourself into the work.
Mhm.
You sort of think about these a little bit like self-portraits, this body of work, right?
These specifically.
Yeah.
And it started with the orange one. So it just kind of like came about. And as I was thinking of show titles, that that was the one that was like in my head,
Yeah.
repeating in my head.
Um, I like how you sort of are directing us around the room by using the background color. Where does your color, like sense of color, come from?
I am a fan of like toxic colors, like very saturated colors. I think I've always been that way. I've been drawn to like bright pinks and florals like that. So colors in nature that are very like saturated but less earthy. Does that
Hmm.
make sense? Like,
Yeah.
you know, when you find like cheap plastic baskets and they're this like radiating like pink or green, like that's what I'm drawn to all the time, or like turquoise. Um,
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
mother said when she moved to America and she was, you know, like she lived with her half brother who was in Massachusetts at the time. And she said when she came and it was like her first like experiences with the food here, she said everything was so pale in color.
Oh, wow.
She was used to like really like lush colored foods. And that's another thing that's always stayed with me because I don't, you know, like mashed potatoes and gravy.
Yeah.
She didn't know that. So
Tan and brown and yeah, kind
yeah,
of boring.
so I don't know. It's just something that I have like intuitively been drawn to, like bright colors, greens. I think nature, you know, always influences me. So, um, and I love to be among nature. I feel like that that is very inspiring for me. But
Yeah, even though these floral patterns are very graphic, being in this space for me, you know, the way that you've incorporated this astroturf, even though, you know, these are all graphic and sort of fake representations of natural elements, it still feels sort of, I don't know, natural in here. And like I do think about nature when I look at your work.
mm.
There's all these, you know, from really pretty realistic representations of different flowers to the more graphic ones.
Yeah,
Um,
and I love the idea of them like they're coming up and blooming from this like a represent again a representation of something organic like the astroturf. Um,
yeah.
that's really captivated me right now. It's really like got me.
I've got a really nice question from an artist here in Austin named Karen Woodward who does beautiful glasswork and also sort of works with complex inner emotions. Um, she, I understand why she's asking this question. She's asking, what did it feel like to make these vulnerable pieces at such a large scale?
I would say it feels good. I mean, um, the goal for the last, I don't know, 2 to 3 years, the pandemic is sort of a blur for me, but the goal was to shift my work into a larger scale. Um, and so that was prompted by the first mural I did, which was, I mean, taller than that. I think that's what, 7 feet,
Yeah,
6 or 7 feet,
80 inches.
something like that. So the mural was taller. And as I was painting it, like my whole body was engaged with the painting, which was a completely new experience for me because prior I had worked small scale, like the one to the right. I think that's Unrequited Love.
Hmm.
Um, and I love the intimacy of small work, especially paper. I love painting on paper. Um, there are these really quiet moments that you can get that I am still trying to figure out how to um, do it larger scale. But the impact of this like visual and like experiential moment with the larger work is something that is also very interesting to me right now. The larger scale, it's like the colors really pop, and because the figures are so simplified, um, I feel like it pops, and the use of like bright colors and as like always the background. And I've been experimenting with these like ombre, um, like moments to bring more depth within this like flat language.
Yeah, I mean, I'll mention it now, and I need to mention it later too before we sign off. But
Mhm.
you're talking about the ombre, sort of deeper moments of your paintings, and from a distance, they're graphic, and your work is very graphic. But there's some really beautiful painting here too, and you're using acrylic paints and latex and spray paint to get these really subtle little shifts.
Hmm.
That
I love those little drips also.
yeah, yeah, I do too. Right here.
Hmm.
Um, you know, the spray effect that you've got here shows up nicely. I would say the color's not very accurate, but you can see that it's there. Whereas, you know, the spray on this pink piece, I can't really pick up. But it's a really nice moment. And I guess I'm curious too, what
Excuse me.
what made you use all these different mediums? Is it to get all these sort of different subtleties?
Yes, I have always, it's sort of like use whatever you need to get the effect that you
Uh-huh.
want. And I'm also a curious person. I think experimenting with different paints and mediums is something that I've just done. Maybe to keep it exciting. I don't know. I I am excited by sort of layering, experimenting, and seeing what works. And I think that's part of the fun of painting. But with these specifically lately, I've been interested in sort of creating these like moments where the colors vibrate and but they're in harmony. So like these little glows on the crowns of the head. Um,
Yeah.
I'm
It's
really
so
into
difficult to
that.
see online, like through this camera,
Uh-huh.
but they really are like I don't know. They give the figures weight. You know, they push them forward in space and push the background further
Yeah.
back, and yeah,
I
they really
think on the yellow orange one, especially too, I was
the big one.
yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's hard to pick up with the phone camera, but the glow at the top is this fluorescent orange. And I really had to restrain myself from like going too far down because I really just wanted it on the crown. But I tried different colors, and the orange was the one that really like was singing, you know.
yeah, nice.
But
Um, and we've got to talk about these ceramics too, because they're a big part of the show. I've been looking at a lot of these paintings, but
mm,
I love these ceramics. How did you? Were you saying that you actually approached ceramics first?
um, years ago, before I moved to Houston, it was in 2013. I lived in Kansas City, Missouri, and I had quit my job. I didn't know anyone. Um, yet in Houston. But before I moved, I started working at this guild, a clay guild, the Kansas City Clay Guild, and it was right by my house. And I spent every day, all day there, like their open hours. And it was just one of these rare moments in my life where everything clicked. Like I connected to the medium in a way I hadn't in a really long time or ever, besides paint. But um, it was this really incredible moment where I felt very in tune with the medium and I was really excited about working. And when I moved to Houston, I never found anything quite like that. I tried working in like outside my house, and it was winter and the clay is cold and wet. It was for, I made a piece for a group show that I was in when I moved here, but I only recently, in the past year, started taking classes at a space here where they have a ceramic studio that I found. So again, it's sort of this like moment, like these pieces as a whole took a year, about a year to make. Several of them have gone through 4 firings. So there's like an underglaze, or there's the bisque firing underglaze, glaze, and then I used either palladium, which is the silver luster and then gold luster on some of them. So the the gold and the silver are the final firing. It's the fourth firing, and it's at like a 0.014, something like that. It's extremely low. So if you go too high, it'll burn off the silver, and the gold will just burn off. But I mean, they're labors of love, and they took a really long time to make. But I was really interested in taking these extremely flat 2D paintings and creating them in a three-dimensional form. So that was new for me. Sculpture is not something that I have always gravitated towards, but I was extremely invested in this ceramic work. You know,
Nice.
like especially the flower face, like the big green head
Mm-hmm.
or green flower, like that one took a really long time, and it was I think this is the largest one I've made so far, but um, combining these like really rendered pieces, like the peonies, against again like representations of flowers, um, like the little black petals and the little like white flowers, and then the 2D flower, like the green. It was just sort of like I would say these green flowers are sort of like the peonies against the magenta one, like reading
Uh,
like wallpaper or textiles.
yeah,
I
nice.
love vintage clothing and patterns. There, there are pictures of my parents in New York. They, like they had just gotten married, and I felt like it was this time where, like the world was open to them every opportunity. You know, maybe that's like romanticizing it in my mind, but specifically this time for them where, um, like the music of the time and the textiles of the time are something that I really respond to visually. And like the music really, I think, goes into the work.
Yeah. Um, and before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to sort of talk about with this work?
Okay, like this one in particular, this was sort of like the start of all the work. They started out as really like primitive floral patterns. Um, and this is like a three-dimensional rendering or like example of that, but they were flat and they were masks. So these floral patterns were repeated with these sort of like void eyes. So think of that, but like flat, two-dimensional. Um, and then eventually over time they became the paintings, you know, where
Hmm.
eyes were behind and like skin tone and hair. So that was kind of like the evolution. So I still like to go back to the primitive version and incorporate that into the work as well,
Yeah,
because
this
that's
one
kind of
is
it in its essence.
the whole show. I really focus on the eyes a lot, and
Mhm.
it's really interesting to me that this one is void.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because that was the birth of
Hmm.
all of them. But I
Well,
think another thing to point out would be like the hair rendering, the mark
mhm.
making. I'm really thinking about like prison art and like cholo art, like the hair rendering, like even my own, like it is very gloss, like black hair, dark hair, how it reflects light and like undulating hair. These subtle light reflections, I think, are just so beautiful and very specific to, I think, like being a brown person, like part of that like identity.
Nice.
So it's something that I again, like I really like painting these and creating these like subtle nuances and moments in the painting.
It is so nice to see how you've translated between the two-dimensional and three-dimensional and how just perfectly they go. Of course, they're your work, and of course, it's the same idea, but all these different important details that you care about, you include, whether it be two-dimensional or three-dimensional.
Mhm.
So cool. Well, Jasmine, thank you so much for your
No, thank
time
you.
today. Um, the exhibition is on view, Late Bloomers, until January 14th. And, I've done the best I can to kind of pick up some of the subtleties of the show, but especially with these little gradient moments in the paintings themselves, all the details. I get, of course, glare when I'm trying to get close. Um, I hope you all can make it in. The gallery will be closed between December 25th and January 1st. But then you've got 2 more weeks to catch it after the holidays. Um, so I hope you can make it by. And Jasmine, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a great day.
You too. Bye.